When the fisherman rode up home, his wife was out front of a white shingled cottage, kicking the pickets on a white fence to see if it was real.
Hey, ho, old fish, come see what I got. Wipe your feet on the welcome mat. See here, looky there, see what I got, and it's mine, all mine.
Mother pattered about the house, and the fisherman...
This is Ohio Educational Broadcasting.
James Madison, why are you no outside with the others? Tell me that, no? Essays Concerning Human Understanding by John Locke. Well, no. The question is, do ye understand him?
Well, yes and no, Master Robertson. What he seems to be saying is that our ideas are a result of our experiences.
Oh, aye, there's a good bit of truth to that. But now, Jimmy, go on outside with your classmates. Will you no be a boy while you can?
I am a boy, and I'm fast on my way to becoming a man. And I do not wish to waste my precious days in playful pastimes. Besides, what kind of chance would I have playing against any of them?
Although James Madison would soon be 16, he was both slight and short. Many Virginia lads of his age were approaching 6 feet, but James barely squeaked by 5.5 feet. While he couldn't compete very well in sports with his schoolmates, he had nevertheless earned their liking and respect, and was often called upon to settle their disputes, for they had found his decisions fair and his judgments sound.
But Master Robertson, every wind that blows nowadays keeps telling me I should waste no time in growing up. As a man, I could do more to help.
Precisely what ye refer to.
Well, the Stamp Act, for one thing.
What do you mean, lad? The Stamp Act was repealed last year. You know that.
Yes, but it was repealed with a declaratory act. And now let me see if I can recall the words. That Parliament has full power and authority to bind the colonies and the people of America, subjects to the Crown of Great Britain. In other words, Great Britain can slap on a tax anytime it wishes, and that's not fair.
Though James Madison was born near Fredericksburg, Virginia, his childhood, shared with 3 brothers and a sister, was spent on a Virginia plantation called Montpelier. After completing his classes with Master Robertson, James moved on to the College of New Jersey, known today as Princeton. It was there that his intense interest in government was both encouraged and influenced by the president of Princeton, Dr. John Witherspoon.
Good afternoon, sir. You are Mr. Madison, are you not?
Good afternoon, sir.
Well?
Oh, yes, I'm James Madison. I'm sorry, I was a bit lost in my thoughts and I did not notice you, sir.
Mr. Madison, I have observed as I lecture that you likewise seem absorbed in your thoughts, eh?
Forgive me, sir, if I appear rude, but you see several of your remarks pose challenging questions which require a great deal of thought, making me seem inattentive. But I do listen to you, sir.
No offense, young man. I was not scolding you. It's a pleasure occasionally to see a thinking face in one's audience.
Dr. Witherspoon,
Huh?
I understand from several of your lectures that you think our difficulties with the Crown will increase.
Absolutely. We Americans are not children to be ordered about by a king who is not even English and who sits upon his precious throne 3,000 miles across the sea. George III has no idea of the needs of the American colonies.
Well, what's to become of us, sir?
The day will come when there must be a reckoning. Men were born to be free. We Americans are no exception. I cannot tell if the day is near or far, but it will come. And when it does, James Madison, see that you are ready.
For war, sir?
For war, aye, and afterward. War brings terror, lawlessness, hate. If a man rid himself of a devil, 7 more devils will come to take its place unless there is something there beforehand ready to fill the gap, huh? Government, my dear sir, I refer to government. Now, when we've swept away the king's rule, what will follow?
Well, as you say, sir, government, our government, the rule of the people.
To be sure. Vox populi, vox Dei, which is to say, the voice of the people is the voice of God. But first, there must be a form, a plan. Make no mistake, it will be with us soon. And when it is, young man, you'd best be prepared for it.
As James Madison was changing from a shy, backward youth to a self-confident young man at Princeton, Dolly Payne, one of 8 children, was growing up on a plantation in Virginia. Now, in 1783, John Payne, Dolly's father, moved his family to Philadelphia, at that time the new nation's capital. There he went into business making and selling starch. Well, by 1789, John Payne's business had failed, and he died soon after. Well, Dolly and her mother then opened a boarding house in order to continue to support their large family. When Dolly was 22, she married John Todd, a young lawyer. Then in 1793, yellow fever broke out in Philadelphia, killing thousands of people. John Todd rushed his family, that was Dolly, 2-year-old John Payne Todd, and 3-month-old William, to a safe place in the country. Then he returned to Philadelphia to help nurse the sick and bury the dead. Finally, the fever seized him. A very sick man, he rode home to Dolly, where he died in her arms. Then Dolly herself fell gravely ill with fever, as did her baby William, who died from it. But finally, the epidemic ended, Dolly recovered, and with her remaining child, moved back to Philadelphia. In 1778, when Thomas Jefferson was elected governor of Virginia, James Madison was a member of the Virginia legislature and Jefferson's aide. Now, one of Jefferson's first jobs was to improve the legal code of Virginia. When he was done, he asked Madison to look it over.
Good afternoon, Jemmy. You've read it?
Every word, several times.
And now that you have it memorized, what do you think of it?
It's monumental. And the part I admire most of all is the bill for the establishment of religious freedom. You know, I wrote a section just like that in the Virginia Declaration of Rights.
Yes, I know. And a great piece of work it is, too.
How can free men seek to bind other men's minds? Of all the areas in which human beings have the right to be free, liberty of thought and religion are foremost.
You and I think alike, James Madison. We shall work well together.
In May 1787, short, slight, quiet James Madison took the front row center seat in a small room of the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia, determined to both guide and record the proceedings of what was to become an historically momentous event. It was the same room in which the Declaration of Independence had been formed 11 years earlier. Madison's friend and fellow Virginian, General George Washington, presided over the meeting. And seated about Madison were a few dozen men from the 12 states who had answered the call to write a constitution for a new government. Well, day after day, for 5 straight months, the delegates argued, they haggled, and subjected themselves to each other's views. Many wanted a strong central government that would unite the separate states, yet have authority over them. and others wanted to protect the powers of the states, thereby leaving a weak central government. Well, when the members of that convention completed their work on September 17, 1787, they had managed to put together a 5,000-word document that was filled with compromises. You know, that is, they kind of bargained back and forth to satisfy each other. Well, the result was that a majority of the delegates were in doubt as to the success of the convention and its constitution. But on one point, there was unanimous agreement. 36-year-old James Madison had played a leading role in the framing of the American Constitution. Through his zeal, his wisdom, and his knowledge of government, he had emerged as the father of the Constitution.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We, the people. There is the rock upon which the government stands.
Aaron Burr, the U.S. Vice President under Jefferson, and the man who later shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel, had been one of Madison's classmates at Princeton. Burr knew Dolley quite well, and it was he who introduced 43-year-old James to 26-year-old Dolley. They fell swiftly in love and were married in 1794. Dolley soon became well known as a social leader, first in Philadelphia and later in Washington, where she served as the nation's official hostess for President Tom Jefferson, whose wife had died. Her warm personality was a great political help to Madison during his term as U.S. Secretary of State. Well, one thing was certain. For James Madison, Dolley was good medicine.
Look at me, 45 years old, and I feel like a strapping young blade.
But you are.
No one can feel old around you, Dolley. You've a gift for living. What a fortunate man I am to have you as a wife. Politics for a career, and Montpelier for the summers. It's maddening, I tell you. The British fleet has begun a blockade of the entire European continent. They call her Mistress of the Seas. Ha! Tyrant of the Western world is more like it.
How will you and Mr. Jefferson solve this situation?
Dolley, your childlike faith can be exasperating at times. We may never solve it. And in that case, God help us.
You will solve it.
Dolley, I do not chant magic words and hope for the best. I've built my life on reason.
And faith and justice and goodness and honor. And you will solve it. Oh, Jemmy, you're home early. Jemmy, something's wrong.
Nothing's wrong.
What is it?
Everything's wrong.
James Madison, will you stop your fidgeting and please make sense?
Dolley, my friends want me to run for president.
And who would be better or as good?
Do you realize what it means? The country is in a dangerous state. Relations with England are growing blacker by the hour. If we avoid war, it will be a miracle. Then, too, I'd be running against James Monroe, who's my dear friend.
I'm sure he hasn't dropped out of the race because you're his dear friend.
Dolley, can't you be serious?
I am serious. Jemmy, you've been traveling towards the presidency since the day you were born. Don't you want the office?
Yes and no. If I'm elected, it won't be easy. I hate to think what I'd be letting you in for.
Oh, James Madison, if you can be president, I guess I can be the first lady. Oh, let me see now. How many months before you take office?
Dolley, I may not be elected.
Well, of course you will. I haven't the slightest doubt that you will become the 4th president of the United States.
And in 1808, James Madison, at the age of 58, did indeed become the 4th president of the United States, succeeding Thomas Jefferson. The inaugural ball was a dazzling affair, leaving the new chief executive rather exhausted.
Oh, my poor darling, you're all in. Let me get you a glass of warm milk to help you sleep.
I don't want to sleep. I'd rather enjoy this blessed peace and quiet, away from all that babble and confusion.
Good. Then we can talk about the ball. That's the fun of a party, talking about it afterwards.
I do think you enjoy it all. Planning it, going through it, then talking about it when it's over.
I do. I love people and gaiety and things happening. Sometimes I think I'm a little wicked.
Dolly, you don't have a wicked bone in your body. You were made for life and excitement and love. I'm blessed with you. I can plainly see I'll never have to give a thought to banquets, balls, receptions, or furnishings. They're your responsibility.
Just as it is yours to run the country. And I know you shall do that nobly. My dearest Jemmy.
One of Dolly's first projects as First Lady was to redecorate the White House, which at that time was called the President's Palace. Meanwhile, one of Madison's projects as President was to direct Congress to declare war on England in order to protect the commercial rights of the United States on the high seas. The war, unpopular with the American public, was called Mr. Madison's War. Well, in 1814, the British captured Washington and then set fire to it. Madison fled the President's Palace to join and help lead American troops camped just outside the Capitol. Dolly had to be left behind. But then, disguised as an old farm woman, she slipped by the British in a horse-drawn wagon, escaping to the open countryside. For several days, James and Dolly lost track of each other, not knowing if the other was safe or even alive. Finally, they were reunited at a country inn.
Dolly.
Jemmy.
Dolly, if anything would have happened to you...
Hush. Everything's fine. I've got good news for you.
Dolly, you are my good news.
Right after you rode away from the mansion, I packed all the state papers into an old farm wagon. And then I had President Washington's portrait taken down from the wall and rolled up. And inside of that, I placed the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I put them in the wagon and we rode off like the wind. At least the British didn't burn them.
They are priceless, my love. But you are more so.
The war ended victoriously for the United States, and it was during that clash, known as the War of 1812, that Francis Scott Key was inspired to write the words for our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1817, James Madison, after having been president for 8 troubled years, retired with Dolly to his beloved Montpelier, where he died at the age of 85. As a young man, James Madison had dreamed of a unified nation with freedom and liberty for all. As a mature man, he had framed the Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights. All the years of his life were a dedication to the country he loved and served so well. After James died, Dolly left Montpelier and returned to Washington, where she continued her social activities. She died in 1849, a much admired woman who had touched the lives of thousands of people and left them happier for having known her.
I would say this country has come a long way. Yes, and it still has a long way to go.
The advice nearest my heart and deepest in my beliefs is that the union of states must be honored and preserved.
The preceding program was made possible by a grant from the Ohio Department of Education.
This is Ohio Educational Broadcasting.
I have always believed that white and black alike could live as brothers under the same almighty God. As a slave in Maryland, I learned to turn the other cheek. In my travels, I have preached peace and brotherhood for all men. But now, this last injustice, this monstrous fugitive slave law, kills my hope and rouses my anger. It seems now that slavery can only end in blood.
Frederick, oh, Frederick, is God dead? Oh, he must not be, he cannot be, or we are dead with him.
The man was Frederick Douglass, hailed as one of the greatest black leaders of the 19th century. The woman, she was Sojourner Truth, a remarkable person who courageously devoted her life to the struggle for black liberation, taking part also in the movement for women's rights. The fugitive slave law, well, that was a law passed by Congress in 1850 which said that captured runaway slaves had to be returned to the slaveholders. People convicted of hiding slaves could be imprisoned or fined so heavily that they would lose everything they owned. As for the runaways, they were denied a trial by a jury, could not testify in court, and might even be shot when captured, or whipped, or sold to the Deep South, where they would probably die anyway from brutal treatment. Sojourner Truth was born a slave in 1797 in New York State and was given the name Isabella. When she was 9, Isabella was taken from her parents and sold to a short-tempered storekeeper who would beat her whenever she displeased him. Later, she was sold to the family of a man named John J. Dumont. Isabella lived with the Dumonts for 17 years, growing into a tall, thin, tough young woman. In 1814, Dumont decided that Isabella should bear children and picked another one of his slaves, a young man named Thomas, to be her mate. Eventually, she gave birth to 5 children. In 1826, Isabella, with an infant daughter, escaped to New York City, where she lived and worked as a free person. Then one day, looking at the people around her, she said to herself, "Truly, here the sick rob the poor, and the poor rob each other." And saying that she was just as guilty of selfish living, Isabella left New York City and set out to find a new way of life.
My name was Isabella. But when I left the house of bondage, I left everything behind. So now I went to the Lord, and I asked him to give me a new name. And he gave me the name Sojourner. For I was to travel up and down the lands, showing the people their sins and being a sign to them. And since the Lord was my master, and his name was Truth, I called myself Sojourner Truth.
Sojourner Truth became a well-known lecturer and preacher. She traveled thousands of miles, often on foot, in order to bring her message to the people. She told anyone who would listen to her about the wrongs of slavery and about the rightness of freedom. Once she heard someone praise the Constitution and how it provided for equality and justice for all.
Now I hear talk about this Constitution and the rights of man. So I take hold of this Constitution. Ooh, it looked mighty big, and I feel for my rights, but they ain't there. And I asked God, I said, "God, what ails this Constitution?" And you know what he said to me? God said, "Sojourner, there's a little evil in it."
What made her one of the most popular orators of the time was her ability to appeal to white people by shaming them or encouraging them or even praising them. She was one of the few black leaders of that period who spoke almost only to whites. And few blacks worked as closely as she did with white abolitionists, those folks who were against slavery. Now, one night in 1852, as Sojourner Truth was speaking to a group of people in a northern state, another black woman in a southern state was fighting slavery in her own special way, on the Underground Railroad. On this particular night, two armed men, patrollers as they were called in the South, galloping along a Maryland road in search of runaway slaves, stopped to nail a sheet of paper to a tree.
Hush! I said hush. It's gone now. It's all right. Come on. We goes this way.
Well, shouldn't we wait some? I mean, them patrollers mighty close.
Can't waste the darkness. We needs every minute.
Oh, what about that sign they pinned to that tree? Jake, you can read. What's it say?
Say you want it, Harry. Dead or alive.
Well, they wants me for a long time now. But they ain't caught me yet. Now we can just forget it. Now let's go.
And so they trustingly followed Harriet Tubman back into the woods. She was their Moses, and like Moses in the Bible, she was leading her people toward their promised land, freedom to the north. So you see, the Underground Railroad didn't look at all like a train in a tunnel chugging along on tracks. It was a system of escape, and it came about when free Negroes, Quakers, and farmers who helped runaway slaves through Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York started using words and phrases normally used for railroads. They called themselves conductors or station masters. Their houses, barns, and haystacks were called depots or stations. The runaway slaves were called passengers. Harriet Tubman was born in 1820 in a one-room, dirt-floored cabin on a plantation in Maryland. When she was 6 years old, Harriet was hired out. Now, hired out was the term used when a slaveholder loaned one of his slaves to another white person and then collected money for it. As she grew older and stronger, she was doing jobs that would have made a strong, full-grown man tired. She worked from dawn to dusk in the rain and in the heat of the sun, chopping down trees, loading wood on wagons, and splitting rails. When she was 15, she was struck in the head with a heavy lead weight while trying to protect an escaping slave from the pursuing overseer. She lay unconscious for days and was expected to die. Miraculously, she recovered. But because of the blow, she suffered spells for the rest of her life, often falling into a deep trance-like sleep. When she was 24, Harriet married John Tubman, a black man who had been born free. Well, soon after, her master's plantation started losing money. Now, whenever that happened, the slaveholders would start selling their slaves south in order to make money to make up their losses. For the slaves, it was just like a death sentence. Harriet decided to escape.
Let's go north together, John. Let's not wait. Let's do it now.
You got a map shows how to get there?
Well, it goes by the North Star. And if it follows it long enough, it'll lead us to freedom.
Well, what you gonna do when the sky's dark and you ain't got no North Star to run by? Besides that, you can't read, so you couldn't tell nothing by the signs on the road. No, ma'am. I ain't going nowhere. I'm satisfied right here in my cozy little cabin.
But you's free, John. I ain't. 2 of my sisters already sold south. Maybe ours next.
They won't take you away from no free black man. You know that.
No, I don't.
Why you freeze to death up north? And anyway, what about the ones who's gone there? None of them come back to tell about it. You know why that is, don't you? Because they was caught and sold south, or they were shot dead by the patty rollers even before they got out of Maryland. If and they were still alive, they'd have returned and showed the way to the rest of you slaves. Harriet, what you gonna get there you ain't got here?
I be's free.
Alone and frightened, Harriet crawled out of her cabin one night, crept into the nearby woods, and began her very first ride on the Underground Railroad. She walked and ran all the first night. At dawn, she made a burrow deep in the underbrush, crawled into it, and fell asleep, setting out again in the late afternoon. She climbed hills and struggled through swamps. She waded miles along a riverbed, knowing the bloodhounds couldn't follow her trail through water. At last, she came to her first underground station, a large farmhouse. And from there, she made her way across the border to Pennsylvania and to freedom. Harriet walked to Philadelphia, where she found a job and began saving a little money and enjoying her new freedom. Meanwhile, Sojourner Truth was having her share of problems as she went about practicing her freedom.
Old woman, you think your talk about slavery does any good? Why, I don't care any more for your talk or your cause than I do for the bite of a flea.
Maybe not, but the Lord willing, I'll keep you scratching.
How dare you put Negroes on the same level as whites? What sort of idiots do you take us for? Why, we all know that blacks are closer to the animal kingdom than whites, and therefore useful only as slaves. You hear that? Well, that's the Lord punishing you for all the lies you just told.
Don't be scared, child. That thunder out there ain't God's wrath. He ain't after me, and he especially ain't after you. The way you've been talking, the way I don't expect he's even heard of you. What? Now look, young man, you talk with hate pouring out your heart, but I talk with love pouring out of mine for both black and white. Matter of fact, one of the reasons I'm against slavery so much is because I want to keep the white folks who hold slaves from getting sent to hell.
There was nobody to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. My home still down there in the old cabin quarter with the old folks and my brothers and sisters. When I thinks about them down there, my joy of escaping leaves me. But soon as I gets me enough money, I's going back and leave my family north. I knows the way now. I knows what to do when it's raining and I can't see the North Star. I done it once alone, and with the help of the Lord, I'll do it again and again and again.
Harriet kept going back to the land of Egypt, as she called Maryland, leading more than 300 Negroes to freedom. In time, she came to know by heart all of the hazards on the long road to the north. She recognized every creek and cove and inlet, every neck of land, every hiding place, every curve in the road, every source of danger, every source of safety. She knew the people who lived in the farmhouses, knew which ones would welcome her and her passengers and offer food and rest, knew which ones would set out after her with guns and clubs. To her people, Harriet Tubman became a legend.
Well, children, I think twixt the black folks of the South and the women of the North all talking about women's rights, white man gonna be in a fix pretty soon. After all, Jesus taught you to honor both father and mother. Now all these white masters allows that women are dainty-bodied, dull-headed gossipers who don't deserve equal rights. Well, look at me. Well, look at my arm. I've been plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could best me. And aren't I a woman? I could work as hard and eat as much as any man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And aren't I a woman? I've born 5 children and seen most all sold off into slavery. When I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard. And aren't I a woman?
The Underground Railroad ain't no fancy joyride. It means walking and sometimes running and being hungry and sometimes jouncing up and down in the bottom of a farmer's wagon. It means crawling dry or rain through swamps and woods and briars and hiding anywhere that the earth offers shelter from prying eyes and listening ears. It means never enough sleep because the walking has to be done at night and the sleeping during the day. And always there's the hounds and the guns and the hooves biting at your guts. But, brothers and sisters, at the end, there's the promised land.
During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman served as a scout, a spy, and a nurse for the Union forces. And Sojourner Truth went a-begging for food and funds for the boys of the 1st Michigan Volunteers Infantry, colored. After the war, Sojourner spent more than 2 years in Washington, D.C., teaching, preaching, nursing, counseling, and campaigning, doing everything she could to get the government to provide jobs and decent living conditions for the millions of blacks it had freed from the bonds of slavery. Harriet took to the platform, traveling throughout the East, speaking sometimes about the rights of women and sometimes about her work in the Civil War. But most of the time, people wanted to hear about her adventures in the Underground Railroad. Sojourner Truth died in 1883 at the age of 86 and was buried in Battle Creek, Michigan. And if Sojourner Truth had not believed so strongly in the justice of the struggle for black liberation, she would not have devoted her life to the cause of truth, and we would never have known her. Harriet Tubman died in 1913. She was over 90 and was buried in Auburn, New York. Of all her achievements, Harriet is best remembered as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, the railroad to freedom. A short, strong-willed woman held up by her faith in a living God, inspired by the belief that freedom was a right all men should enjoy.
And truth shall be my abiding name.
I'll never run my train off track, and I'll never lose as a passenger.
Way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
The preceding program was made possible by a grant from the Ohio Department of Education.